joining me today. I have a watercolor card video to share with you featuring Zig markers. I've got Zig felt and Zig real brush markers featured in this video, so I hope that it will be inspiring to you. If you are a regular follower of either my Simon Says Stamp Studio Monday series videos or my YouTube channel, you will recognize the coloring in this video because these were cards that I created for my Studio Monday post showcasing the Zig Clean Color and Zig felt brush markers and comparing the two markers to show you the differences and let you see how the markers react to watercoloring. So if you want to see that video, I encourage you to go check it out and watch the coloring, learn a little bit more about the markers, and see what things you can do to color and create with these. As you can see right here, I'm coloring in some stamped images that I had stamped out from a Simon Says stamp set. This was the Dancing Fruits stamp set that I'm using here to color in these images. At the moment, you're watching me color in the fruits using the real brush markers. If you're not familiar with real brush markers, these are Zig markers that have a watercolor medium inside and they have a brush tip, whereas some markers that you can use to get watercoloring effects have a felt tip. These have an actual brush, so they react a little bit differently, and the effects that you get are really cool and mimic the look of using a paintbrush. One of the things I love about the real brush markers is that you can layer wet on wet with these, which is one thing you don't want to do with the Zig felt brush markers because you don't want to damage the felt tip. Now both the felt brush and the real brush markers have the same exact colors in them. I don't believe that there is a really large set of the felt brush. I believe you can only right now get the 46 set as the biggest set for the felt brush. For the real brush, I believe there are over 80 markers. So there's a lot of colors to choose from in the real brush. But the same numbers that are on the real brush markers correspond with the numbers on the felt brush. So if you have, say for instance here, this bright yellow marker, the bright yellow marker in the felt brush is the exact same color and number as the real brush marker. So what I like about them is that you can use the markers together. So you could use the real brush to create a really nice watercolor coloring and then bring in the felt brush markers after the coloring has dried and add additional details. You could use both of the markers though separately like I'm doing here. I colored in the fruits first with the real brush and now I'm coloring them in with the felt brush. So you get slightly different results because they both react differently to water, slightly. It's not a huge difference, but it's a difference enough that you do have to keep in mind certain techniques can be used better on one marker than on other markers. And that Zig comparison video that I mentioned earlier talks about all of that. It goes through all of the differences and which techniques work better for which markers, and I show multiple examples of doing the techniques. So I hope you'll check that out. I'll have it linked down in the video description and over at my blog. So after I colored in these fruits, like I said, I colored them in with both the Zig and the real brush markers. You can see the two here. The one on the left is done with the Zig real brush markers, and then the one on the right is done with the felt brush. So you can see there's a slight difference in how the coloring ends up turning out. Again, also too with watercoloring, watercoloring cannot be recreated to look exactly the same every time. But there is still a difference in how the coloring finishes out with both the different markers. So after I colored them, I'm cutting them out with my fussy cut scissors. These are the Cutter Bee scissors from EK Success. There are no coordinating dies for this stamp set, so if you do want to create this card, you will need to cut them out. You could leave a white outline like I'm doing here to make it look like they've been die cut, or you can cut right up to the line. To create the cards, I first started off by bringing in some Simon Says Stamp wood grain cardstock. I love this cardstock because it has such a great texture to it. There's also the Holtz wood grain cardstock, which is also a really great cardstock and fun to use. It looks very similar to this. The texture that you have on these cardstocks is really cool, and I was using this as a background for my fruits. So I die cut two of those because I am creating two different cards. I'm cutting down some card bases using some Neenah Desert Storm cardstock. This is the 110 pounds, so it's a little bit heavier weight. And I did cut both a side folding and a top folding card just because I felt like doing a side fold and a top folding. Both cards are going to be aligned vertically, but I wanted to have two different types of card bases. So I'm bringing in my Misty stamping tool and I'm going to start stamping a sentiment strip that's going to go in between my fruits. To stamp my sentiment, I'm using the You Matter stamp set, which is one of my favorite sentiment sets from Simon. I'm going to be aligning the word Thinking of You onto my Misty, and I'm going to pick them up and stamp them in some clear ink. So that's why I can heat emboss the sentiment. I'm going to be heat embossing this in white embossing powder. I first need to prep the surface though of my paper, especially since this is dark colored cardstock. I want to make sure that I don't have any flecks of embossing powder sticking to places I don't want them to be, because that will show up a lot more on the darker cardstock than if it was a lighter. So after I stamp my sentiment down with that clear embossing ink, I'm going to bring in the white embossing powder and sprinkle that on top, tap off the excess, and then I'll bring in my heat tool and heat set that. Once I heat set that sentiment, I trimmed it down into a little banner, and I'm going to be aligning the fruits onto my card as you see here. I first need to attach the white cardstock onto my card base, so I'm going to be using some fun foam on the back side. This will allow me to pop that panel up off of the card base. I'm using my favorite new tape runner here. This is the ThermoWeb tape runner, and I love how well this tape runner works. I used to use the ATG adhesive, and I have found that using this ThermoWeb adhesive has been a dream, and I really encourage you to check it out. Speaking of ThermoWeb adhesives, I've got the Zots Singles 3D dots. These are so cool because you can use these to pop images up onto your card. These are not quite as thick as foam tape, so if you're looking for something to be not quite as thick, I would totally check these out because these are really cool. They are a little bit more like a jelly kind of dot. They're not firm like a piece of foam tape. They have some flexibility and they're kind of squishy too. So I'm going to go ahead and line these up onto my card and figure out the placement. I found out that as I was working here, I wanted to kind of play around with where the fruits were going to go, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'll keep the backing on the back side of those dots until I'm ready to push them down into the paper. So keep the adhesive backing on the back side of the dots until you're ready to press the images down, because it allows you to slide them around and kind of figure out the placement before you are ready to fully commit to something. I'm also going to be using some Zots dots, that's a tongue twister. These are flat, so these are just like any sort of tape runner, but they're on little backing sheets, so they're single pieces and they're perfect for small things. I wanted something that I could stick behind this sentiment batter since it's pretty thin. So I'm going to use 2 of those, one on each end, and then I'm going to use a piece of the 3D dots. I'm going to trim that down and use that in the center. This is going to allow me to create a curved sentiment banner that's going to go over top of my apple. So I lay that little 3D piece into the center of the apple, and then those 2 little Zots dots, those are going to go on either side and hold the banner down. So you can see it's got a cool dimensional feel to it. So that pretty much finishes up the cards. The only other thing I did was I added some embellishing using some Nuvo drops. So here I've got some yellow, and I'm adding these over top of the little dot detailing that's on the stamp sets. So I used yellow for the lemon, red for the apple, and then I also used some green for the pear. And that just adds a little bit of texture to the finished off fruits and makes the images have a little bit more of an interesting feel. So I hope you enjoyed these clean and simple cards. I had shown the end result of the cards in my Zig comparison video, and some of you were interested in knowing how I created the cards, so I wanted to share that with you so you could see how I got to the end result in the creating of these cards. So I hope you've enjoyed and got some inspiration using some Simon Says Stamp products and got to enjoy some coloring using the Zig felt and the Zig real brush markers. If you enjoyed, please give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more inspiration. I will see you again very soon. Bye!